This video walks you through the Standardization Fundamentals learning exercise. Now, the Standardization Fundamentals learning exercise really just touches on the standardization features within Modano, which are really a fundamental part of using the system properly, even if you eventually end up building modules, etc. So it's really important to understand these concepts, even though they're not as exciting as some of the things we'll get to in the later exercises. Now, before we get started, go to the Modano tab, and by default, you'll see Modano installs in Automate mode, which shows all the modular development tools. But you can switch across to Standardize and Review mode if you'd just like to see the tools required to standardize and make your spreadsheets best practice. So in this exercise, we're going to leave the system in Standardize and Review mode, and we're also going to use what we call the default theme. Now, if you go to the Options menu within the Modano tab, you can see the Options menu item loads the Modano Options dialog box. Now, the Options dialog box enables you to customize pretty much every single element of your Modano setup. So by default, the theme is a blue assumptions theme and blue barred theme, but you can actually change any of the styles in the system and even create your own styles from scratch and customize the way number formats and logos look, etc. So we're going to use the default theme, so I'm just going to press cancel for this exercise, but bear that in mind if you want to create a corporate theme, for example. Now, if you look at the Modano tab in Standardization Review mode, the order of the tools really reflects the way in which you go about building financial models. So you start by creating a workbook. You then insert sheets, update the table of contents, apply formats and styles, and then do things such as insert time series analysis, checks, and then undertake a review of your model at times as you build it. And that's really the way Modano is designed to be used as a development and review tool. So you're effectively doing a 365-degree review as you build. Now, when you start a new model, you can either choose between a blank workbook, which doesn't contain time series analysis, or you can choose to insert a workbook with some time series infrastructure that you can then edit or delete or change. It just saves you some time because it allows for most common time series infrastructures. Now, let's start by just clicking on the Insert Blank Workbook, which is a workbook that will not contain time series. And you'll see that instead of starting with an empty spreadsheet or an existing template, what this does is it creates a new workbook with a hyperlinked table of contents. And it's really designed just to give you an infrastructure to build upon rather than sort of force you to use any particular approach. Now, by default, sheets are inserted to the right of whatever sheet you have active in Modano. So if I want to insert a sheet, say a revenue assumption sheet after this existing sheet here, I could obviously rename and retitle this sheet, or I could just go to the Modano tab and do Insert Sheet, choose the sheet type, in this case a blank assumption, and I can just type in revenue, and you'll see the table of contents by default will be updated, and then I can type in revenue as the sheet title, and then I can use the table of contents hyperlink at the top of any sheet to go back. So you can see now I've got my revenue in 1B of the table of contents, and that's how I go about building my model up. Now, to the extent that I insert sheets or rename sheets and don't have the table of contents get updated automatically, I can always update the table of contents by just going to the Update Table of Contents button, and if I like to include printed page numbers, which is something we often do if we're going to do, say, a packaged output presentation workbook for clients, and then you can actually print and disseminate the model almost like a Word document. Now, at the core of Modano is the concept of purpose-based formats and styles. Now, purpose-based formats and styles refers to every single functional cell in your model visually reflecting what its purpose and what its content is. Now, you don't have to do this. It's just something the system recommends. And to demonstrate the impact of that, if I switch across to the Standardization Fundamentals learning exercise and I go to the revenue and expenses assumptions in 2B, you can see here, ignoring the top section, which hasn't been styled yet, you can see down here, it's really easy to see both where the assumptions are, where the constants are, and where formulas are. So for example, there's a formula cell there because the constants are in blue, the formulas are in black, and anything that's a mixture of a constant and formula is in green, and that's called a mixed cell. Now the assumptions, in this case, we've used blue formatting for fill color. Traditionally, people have just done this manually. What Modano does is provides you with a really easy set of menus where you can go in and apply those formats and styles. So in this case, for the base amount, we're going to apply an assumptions number style, which I can do using the mouse or by Alt-L-A for assumption and then N for number. And then I can go across and apply percentage style the same way, so Alt-L-A-P. And then after doing that, I can then apply decimal places. So if I want to do 2 decimal places, I can click there, I can do Alt-L, D, 2. And in this way, it's very, very easy to create formats and styles which are automatically standardized according to your theme. I'll just put a border on this and put a right border. And you'll see it also, when you apply the styles using Modano, it automatically puts in data validation. So you can see the data validations come in, and it's stopping people just entering random text into these cells. And it also, when you apply assumption styles, ensures that they're not protected. So if I now go and protect this sheet, I can go and change this assumption to say 25, but I can't go and change, say, this heading, which is a non-assumption because it's protected. So there's actually a lot of method behind the madness in the way in which you use formats and styles in Modano, and people greatly underestimate the impact they have on the quality of the model and the reusability and the risk of the model. Now, number formatting is obviously important, and assumptions formatting is also important, but the system also gives you a range of headings. Now, you'll see this bar across here is a heading 1 style. It's been styled using the outputs heading 1 style. This notes heading, for example, I would apply heading 3, and these guys are already formatted, so I'm just going to put a heading 4 on those guys, and you can see that's gone green because if you look at the formula, it's actually a formula with text within it, which is a mixed cell, which is why it's green. These headings here, I can then go in and apply, say, heading 4 to them, and you'll see they've gone blue because they're constants. So the system really takes care of cell content and purpose identification as you format and style cells. Now, to the extent you're building time series models, which most people do, particularly when they're building financial models, you can start by using a time series workbook rather than a blank workbook. Now, a time series workbook simply enables you to specify what periodicity you'd like for your model, what your initial term would be, and it literally just saves you the time of having to build it up from scratch yourself. So it deals with a lot of common periodicities and timeframes, such as monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, etc. And basically, instead of just going with a cover and some sheets, it actually goes in with a time series assumptions component, which you can see here, and a time series outputs component. So in this case, we have 8 periods, 1st of January 2018, and it allows for historical and forecast periods and data projections as well. So if I now go to my outputs, my assumption sheet here, I've got 8 periods, and I can actually start, and I can insert sheets by just doing insert base sheet time series assumptions, and I can in this case put an annual sheet in, all periods, and I'll do, say, revenue, update the table of contents, and this is how we go about building, say, revenue projections. So you'll see now I've got a revenue sheet in there. So it's exactly the same process as with the blank workbook, but we have the time series assumptions, time series lookup tables, which are used by the time series assumptions to do things such as provide the drop downs on the, for example, the financial year end. So the infrastructure it gives you really is just the ability to actually specify your time series assumptions without having to build it from scratch and insert time series sheets to then build content. And you'll see this is the exact approach that's been used to build this model, with the time series period titles across the top. And if you go to the time series assumptions, you can see the time series assumptions in 2A are based on that standardized approach. Now, something else Modano makes really easy is inserting checks. And it does this by automatically allowing you to include in your model an error checks summary, which you can access on most sheets via the error check hyperlink in cell A2. And you'll see it enables for error checks, sensitivity checks, and alert checks, depending on what different type of check you need. And it really makes it easy for you to put these summaries in automatically. And then to add a check, you can simply go to a range such as the balance sheet here, put an error check calculation across the row. In this case, the error check is checking for error values in net assets and total equity. And then we have the balance sheet check itself, which is checking the balance sheet's balancing to 5 decimal places. Then we've literally said in each case, if the check isn't right, put a 1, otherwise put a 0. And therefore, if an error pops up, it will actually return a 1 down below. And we've used conditional formatting to actually capture it to make it clear when an error has been triggered. In this case, the error check, though, hasn't been put through to the error check summary. So you can see if I go to the error check at the back, the error check summary is not there. The balance sheet is not in there. So I'm just going to go to this cell. I'm going to select the actual error check cell itself, and I'm just going to do insert error check, add error check, and I'm going to specify as the specified check sheet, I'm going to specify the balance sheet here as the check to display in the check summary, and then I'm just going to add that check. And you'll see once I do that, I can go back to my error check summary. My balance sheet check is now in there, it's linked through, and if I actually trigger that check and put an error in there, it triggers the error check on the balance sheet, which flows through and is picked up by the balance sheet. Now that is then picked up in an error in balance sheet calculation on this sheet, which goes right through to the model name cell on the overview sheet. So the system really ensures that it's impossible to have an error in your model without A, being able to easily identify that it's there because it's in on every sheet below the title, but B, being able to easily isolate that check and go and fix it. So that error check system really is designed to make it really inexcusable not to include error checks throughout your model. Now, the final thing we're going to look at in this exercise is workbook viewing. Now, workbook viewing is one of those things that everyone takes for granted, but again, makes a huge difference to the usability and user-friendliness of a model. So the tools in the workbook view menu give you the ability to change for example, the zoom of every single sheet in the entire workbook instead of just one at a time, which is really handy when you open another workbook and you're like, there's a huge amount of data on these sheets, let's make them smaller. It also enables you to do things such as control compacted levels and expanded levels. Now, you see the way the system recommends that you use up to 3 levels of grouping, where you can double group things you don't want to appear by default, but then you can actually single group everything else so that when you actually compact up your sheets, they almost look like, an accordion. And then you can actually do level 2, and that'll show you what you want to show, what we call in print view, when you want to print the workbook. So the system really supports that, and it supports you then running what we call a save view tool, which actually sets every sheet to that correct view in terms of grouping and collapsing, expanding rows, and then puts every sheet to the top left with the cursor in cell A1 and activates the cover sheet. And it's called the save view tool because we recommend running it before you save a workbook, so that when someone next opens the workbook, they have this sheet in front of them. So that's really just an overview of the standardization tools. There's obviously a lot of tools in here that we've just touched on, but don't underestimate the importance of these tools for building really complex financial models, because at the core of every really good financial model is standardization.